All right, so this session that we are introducing, not just introducing, but because of the centenary of the writings of the Tablets of the Divine Plan, it was pertinent during this particular year, between now and 2017, that for the Baha'i community to reflect on the Tablets of the Divine Plan that were written by the Master himself, Abdu'l-Baha, to the American communities in North America, Canada, United States, and all the states within it.
And Greenland.
Correct, and Greenland. Its own country, as Alaska is, right? Okay. So the importance of the introduction to this, and also for the people attending, is basically we had a morning session. We're going to continue to do this in the afternoon session, and the objective is that with the youth and younger believers, as well as the older believers within the community, that we get a new re-understanding of the importance of these letters to the community, okay? All right, so I'm going to read off a couple of the slides that we have, and then we're going to give some more in-depth understanding. So the century of the revelation of the Tablets of the Divine Plan basically is during this year of March of 2016. This is when the Abdu'l-Baha had initiated these tablets and written them in Bachi and then sent them off to the American community. And basically we mark the centenary of Abdu'l-Baha's revelation and the first tablets of the Divine Plan. Of the 14 tablets, 8 were revealed between March 26 and April 1916. 6 more followed in February and March 1917. Basically, these short letters, some on postcards. So as you can see with the first photo that you saw, very humbly, it's incredible that Abdu'l-Baha wrote these pristine and wonderful tablets just on a postcard and sent them off to the United States for it to be studied and read. And so even after 100 years, we are only in the beginning stages in seeing this effect of these tablets. And we'll get into that further as we talk about this as to its longevity and its continuing effect throughout the centuries. They apply not only throughout ages and centuries in this world, but throughout all the worlds of God. The important thing about the Tablets of the Divine Plan is that it constitutes also 2 other documents, that not just documents, tablets and revealed writing from Baha'u'llah. The first one is the Tablet of Carmel. The second is the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha. And the third is the Tablets of the Divine Plan. Shoghi Effendi stated that these are the charter letters and tablets of the Baha'i world community. The essential writings that we, as an administration or as a planning community, delve into these letters and create and delve and get our inspiration from these to create the plans. Okay. So as you can see, go back. So as you can see, the particular letters, for the first, the Tablet of Carmel is the mandate for the development of the Baha'i World Center. This you can see with the evolution of the structures, with the institutions that are being developed on the mountain itself. And that development is still continuing now and maturing. The second is the Will and Testament, which defines the charter of the future world civilization, so basically giving the structure for the administration. Third is the conquest of the planet with the Tablets of the Divine Plan, which we are delving into today. And these particular documents are providing the guidelines for the global expansion, which is basically the teaching and guidance for humanity. So the Tablets of the Divine Plan, this is an interesting letter from the House of Justice, which gives kind of context as to our dedication and continuing remembrance that we need to dive into these documents every time we look at any prospect for planning. So as you are no doubt aware, the Tablets of the Divine Plan, which were revealed by Abdu'l-Baha during the First World War, are the charter for the teaching of the faith. All the teaching plans launched by the beloved Guardian, as well as those subsequently directed by the Universal House of Justice, are stages in the implementation of this master plan, conceived by the center of the covenant for the diffusion of the message of Baha'u'llah. So as you can see that charter itself, without it, we're kind of lost. If we try to reinvent the wheel, let's say, be it the National Assembly, be it a local spiritual assembly, we have to understand that it all devolves from that. Not to say that we pattern ourselves, but we get our inspiration, we understand what the future entails, and where we basically grasp our power from. It doesn't come from us, it comes from the source of revealed writing, right? So these are the tablets in specific form. You have the first 8 tablets which were revealed, and this is, as you can see, are pretty clear. Northeastern states, southeastern states, central, western, Baha'is of Canada, Baha'is of the United States and Canada, Baha'is, and again, throughout the last 3, and then in the second one you have as well a repeat and a redirection to those same communities. Some people have come up to us and said, why isn't Greenland part of the beginning tablet for the tablet to the Canada? When you read the letter of the tablet itself, it doesn't address it to Greenland itself. Basically, it addresses it to Canada, and Greenland is part of the territories that are listed under the specific letter. Okay. I would also encourage the friends who know Farsi to acquire. I'm going to say it in Farsi. Mr. Bowden is probably going to. It's called Faramiye Tabi'i Hazrat Abdul Baha. So I would encourage the friends to delve into it directly, because as you read the revealed word, you get a better understanding, and those who are also fluent in it can also see the context and spirit of the master himself as he's revealed it. The translated version that we have is also done by in the early days by Sharaf, which was his one of his secretaries. Okay. Okay. So basically, as we can see, we're going to show in more historical context that the tablets of the northeastern states were sent to individuals. Now this has an interesting context to the travels of Abdu'l-Baha beforehand. So Abdu'l-Baha, as you know, and we did do the centenary celebrations of Abdu'l-Baha's coming to the Americas and Europe, that he had met certain individuals who were Baha'is. And some of these Baha'is that you see here are the ones he had sent those tablets to reveal to the community. And some of them we're not very familiar with, like Hooper Harris and Joseph Hannon. We're going to have a photo of these individuals later on, but they're not well known within the community, but they have a historical early presence within the faith. May Maxwell, you know very well. She is the mother of Rihia Khanum, who is the guardian's wife. Zia Baghdadi, people are very aware of in Chicago, and Hedin Goodall, who is a wonderful servant of Abdu'l-Baha in the western states. And the other tablets were addressed to other Baha'is throughout North America, but were received later. And we'll explain that in the early years during the difficulties of the First World War, Abdu'l-Baha had to basically entomb half the tablets in a vault in the Shrine of the Bab for the period, because there was dangers that maybe the World Center might be shut down, or Abdu'l-Baha himself might be incarcerated. So once that passed, the tablets were released from the vault, and then they were sent off to the west. And the first group of tablets were published in 1916, as we can see, in the Stars of the West. As you remember, these were just tablets on postcards, so the only way the community was able to see them was that they were published in these early publication magazines, which I'm not sure if some of you are aware of, were called Stars of the West. You can still see some of these writings or magazines. If you can look at them online, you'll see those tablets in there. And then after that, the communication with the Holy Nun was cut off, like we had mentioned. Tablets remained in a vault. In 1919, the remaining were sent to New York, where they were unveiled during the Convention of the Covenant. And this is when they were introduced in highlighted form. They were enlarged. And then you can see the actual building that this was introduced in. And Shastri has a bit more detail about it, but as he had told me, which I wasn't aware of, it was the most expensive hotel in the world. Basically had its own Turkish bath, had its own telephone services. It was quite, no, I think it's gone. I'm pretty sure it's gone. And basically it was revealed there, and then and built in 1912, and it was the largest hotel with Turkish bath, yada, yada, yada. Okay, next one. All right, so this one is quite interesting because you can see this young lady, which was quite unique. Nobody really was aware of that. Rihia Khanum was actually at the unveiling of the tablets, which was here, which was at this location here. And basically it was a very exciting event, because it was the first time that there was a worldwide instruction of where we were to go next.
If you notice, they're all ladies.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's Baha'i culture. Women at the forefront. Right? This is an interesting an account from one of the secretaries of Abdu'l-Baha, which I'll read. It basically gives a kind of inkling into to that particular period where Abdu'l-Baha decided to write the tablets. And I'll read it out. One, Sharaf says, on Monday morning, March 26, 1916, he was sitting peacefully in his room, meeting the master, in Bahji, now and then looking out of the window over the olive garden, beyond the sea and far, it seems, into the infinitude. Suddenly he turned his wonderful, penetrating eyes upon me and asked me to chant one of the prayers of Baha'u'llah. As I continued my chant, I felt a strange consciousness coming over me, a realization of my unworthiness in being permitted to live so long and so near the divine presence of Abdu'l-Baha. When I finished the prayer, he looked at me with charming sweetness, that soft, dancing light in his eyes, and said, "Thou must be infinitely grateful to Baha'u'llah that he has chosen thee to be with me for so long a time. Surely it must be for a great purpose that it is not apparent at the present time. It will become clear in the future. Now bring pen, paper, and ink, and I will dictate the tablets to America." Okay, so these are samples of the tablets that were sent to both the original and translated versions. So, as you can see, they're on postcards, and you can see the original in Persian, and you can see the original that's already been translated in the subsequent card. And you can see, as Shastri had pointed out in our previous session, that the Ottoman seal is on the postcard. And remember that at that point, all letters going out of that Ottoman Empire were actually screened. Right? And and this is Hooper Harris, who was the recipient of the first tablet. And these are just samples so you get an understanding of what they look like. And we selected a small quote from one of the translated versions. It says, "Now we must not consider our ability and capacity, nay, rather, we must fix our gaze upon the favors and bounties of God in these days, who has made us a drop, a seed, an atom, a sun. Upon you be greetings and praise." And this is, in these letters, you'll find this narrative continually to enhance the nobility of the Baha'i individual, to understand his potential. And we'll find other examples of individuals like Martha Root, Agnes Alexander, and the like, who were like that, where drops came into seas and atoms exploded. Okay, and so now we have this kind of a context of the age and time that this was all happening in. We always find that within the Baha'i history, and it continues now, that under the greatest of difficulties within the world around us, the secular world, politically or whatever, you have these huge downfalls. And during these difficult periods of disaster, you have this is the most important time for the community of the Baha'i faith. You'll find that at these particular times, you have this surge of expansion and of growth. And as you can see, the First World War was already at its height during that period. Albert Einstein completes the mathematical formation of the theory of relativity. First U.S. Congresswoman has served as a Republican in Congress, was elected, which kind of constitutes this idea of women's suffrages. Right? And then the National Park Services, which is a standard bearer throughout the world now that shows this preservation of territory for the public good. And then we come to this wonderful book, which I'll give to Shastri.
Hope this works out. So one of the things that we noticed as we went through the tablets of the Divine Plan was how again and again and again, Abdu'l-Baha, this theme seems to pop out of taking something very ordinary and very plain, and Abdu'l-Baha would infuse it with the spiritual power which would affect, the human race for centuries and millennia to come. So one example of this is this high school textbook. Well, not this exact textbook, but this is the same edition. So as far as we understand, one day some students from the American University of Beirut, or from Beirut, had come, and Abdu'l-Baha noticed the textbook. And he said, "What's that?" And the student said, "Well, it's a textbook." And Abdu'l-Baha said, "Well, can I have it?" And obviously you're not going to deny Abdu'l-Baha when he asked for your geography textbook. And Abdu'l-Baha, with Sohrab's help, used this textbook in writing the Tablets of the Divine Plan. So I went on Amazon, and for $7.50 plus shipping, got a copy of the textbook. So if you guys want to hit Amazon, it's World Geographies, Tarr and McMurray, first book.
Say it again.
World Geographies, first book, Tarr, T-A-R-R, and McMurray.
They still have more?
I haven't checked today, I don't know.
More or there won't be.
I don't know how many copies there are in the world, but
What year was it published?
let's see. So the very first edition, I think, was 1913. This copy that I've got here is a little bit later than that, like after the World War, I think. 1921.
That's great.
So we took a few photos from inside the textbook. So when you open the textbook, on the very, very first page of the textbook is a picture of some cows. Right? And in the textbook, it's basically talking about food and agriculture and things like that. Now, you guys might remember in Tablets of the Divine Plan, Abdu'l-Baha talks about the cow, right? Remember, he says, if you want to be really, really, really successful in the material world, go become a cow, because that is the most successful, besides the bird, he gives that example. And so, Abdu'l-Baha says these fattened cows roam freely over the tableland. All the prairies and meadows are theirs for grazing. So here's one example where he takes the first page of the textbook, an ordinary thing, gives us spiritual lessons, and for the whole dispensation, people are going to be understanding the wisdom of the cow and how not to be a cow. So if we go to the next slide. I also took some photos of the way the US is divided up in the textbook matches the Tablets of the Divine Plan in terms of the 4 regions. It's just the way the textbook decided to divide up the US.
And it's no longer like that. No longer the textbooks divided like that?
No, in this textbook it is.
No, now,
I
currently.
don't know.
No.
It's like an 8th grade geography textbook. But if you took, these maps show exactly the same regions as we're all familiar from the Tablets of the Divine Plan. So again, Abdu'l-Baha walked the practical path with mystical path with practical feet, right? He's just using a high school geography textbook, but look at the impact it's had on history. Unfortunately, some people ask me about Canada. There is no map of Canada in this book. But again, it shows how caring Abdu'l-Baha was. He actually, thought about Canada even though there's no map of Canada in the book. Now, on the second page of the book, there's a picture of, it talks about shelter, and there's a native, indigenous, girl with a wigwam there. And then on the very next page, there's a picture, I think it says, a nomad, Arabian nomad of the desert. So you guys might remember, if you go to the next slide, Abdu'l-Baha actually compared the two. He said that the indigenous population of America can be likened to the ancient inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula, and basically how they became transformed with the coming of Muhammad, and how the Baha'i revelation can do the same for the indigenous population of America. Again, you can see this, he saw it on the textbook, obviously, gave us spiritual lessons from this lowly textbook. If you go to the next slide, I think on the 4th or 5th page, there's photos of Eskimos. And, it's talking to the high school students about how Eskimos live and so on. So, and Abdu'l-Baha, as also said that the effect will be very great and far-reaching. So he, again, paid attention to all the different races of the world. In terms of Americas, he gave these examples, but that's applied as the faith has grown all over the world for indigenous people. Next. So, I just want to quickly say there's going to be some references to movies and pop culture things. And I gave this presentation to some junior youth, and I think besides, our own there's 2 goals for this presentation, basically. One is to get all of us excited to reread and study the Tablets of the Divine Plan. And also, maybe, if we can give some tools to excite junior youth and youth to really get excited about this and study it themselves. My 11-year-old niece, who's very, very demanding, gave me the thumbs up for some of the things we're going to talk about. So I've tested it with junior youth. So one of the things that runs through the Tablets of the Divine Plan is this concept of the hero's journey. If you think why was Star Wars successful, it's not just because of lightsabers. It's because it taps into this spiritual need that all human beings have to go on what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey, where you start off in a very, ordinary, boring place. You grow and fulfill and become a hero. So, if we go to the next slide. Oh, I'll come back to think of this hero's journey, I'll come back to it in a second. one of the other things I noticed is some of the things in the tablets of the Divine Plan almost seem like Abdu'l-Baha is calling us to develop superpowers. So if you say being able to change a stone into a ruby and a shell into a pearl, and he's saying, you know, whereas formerly there was moths, they became as royal falcons. And I had my own little kind of ordinary to extraordinary experience a few months ago with this. I was in CVS pharmacy buying some toothpaste or something really boring. And all of a sudden, the song came on the radio in the CVS was Go East of the Ginger Trees by Seals and Crofts, right? And you might remember in that song, Seals and Crofts quote from the tablets of the Divine Plan. They say, be lions roaring in the forest of knowledge, and wisdom, whales swimming in the ocean of life, prepare to meet Baha'u'llah. So here I am in CVS, getting some toothpaste, it's saying, prepare to meet Baha'u'llah. You know? And I'm thinking, these were postcards that were written 100 years ago. And look at the effect they're having. They're being played all around me as I'm buying my toothpaste, you know, and this is just the beginning of 100 years later. Imagine thousands of years in the future. In another part of Tablets of the Divine Plan, Abdu'l-Baha literally says, it seems to become Superman or Superwoman. He says, travel throughout the world and call the people to the kingdom of God. Through this superhuman service, the rays of peace and conciliation may illumine and enlighten all the regions, and the world of humanity may find peace and composure. So again, he's calling us to really go on a hero's journey. Now, I'm going to read this quote, and you tell me if this doesn't seem like a Jedi, okay? So Abdu'l-Baha says, should one of them turn his face towards some direction and summon the people to the kingdom of God, all the ideal forces and lordly confirmations will rush to his support and reinforcement. He will behold all the doors open and all the strong fortifications and impregnable castles razed to the ground. Singly and alone he will attack the armies of the world, defeat the right and the left wings of the host of all the countries, break through the legions, the lines of the legions of all the nations, and carry his attack to the very center of the powers of the earth.
Yes, of course.
Jedi language. So, you know, this almost sounds so amazing that you start to wonder, is Abdu'l-Baha just sort of saying nice things, you know? Or is this like for real? You know, is this really going to happen? And I want to tell us a few stories to show how Abdu'l-Baha wasn't just saying nice things. He really, really meant what you just saw. Is anyone here from Pittsburgh by any chance? Nobody? You were just there? Okay. I'm going to say something that I hope doesn't offend anyone from Pittsburgh. But so basically, there's an encounter that took place in what might seem like the most ordinary scenario possible. So it's in Pittsburgh, in a diner, like a Denny's kind of a thing, but in 1908 it was called Child's Restaurant. So thinking of the hero's journey, this might as well be Tatooine or Jakku, you know, where Luke or Rey is there. It's just like nothing going on, right? So what happens is a businessman comes in for dinner, kind of late at night, and there's not many seats left, so they send him way, way, way to the back, and they say, you know, if you want to eat here, go sit in the back. So he goes and sits in the back, and he happens to be next to two ladies who are discussing religion. So one lady is saying, you know, it's such a shame that people who don't believe in Christ and so on are going to be burning in hell, and, you know, it's really a shame. And the other lady says, I'm not so sure. I think good people, you know, they've got some path for their souls, you know. And then both ladies get up to leave. Now, meanwhile, this businessman is thinking, should I say something? Should I not say something? Initially, he's like, nah, I'll just eat my dinner. But then they have to go, he has to get up and they have to walk by him in order for them to get out, right? So this lady who's talking about hell and, you know, damnation and so on just goes out. And then the man says to the other lady, he says, you know, I couldn't help but over here, what you were talking about, and I need to tell you something. I've just come back from a place called Akka, and I met someone named Abdu'l-Baha, and I'd like to give you my card, and maybe we can stay in touch. So that gentleman was Roy Wilhelm, and the lady was Martha Root. So think about the impact on human history from that ordinary, plain dinner scene in Pittsburgh. So as many of you know, Martha Root, even when that Convention of the Covenant was hardly finished, she was up packing her bags, preparing the trip. And interestingly, the display of the tablets that you saw where Mary Maxwell was unveiling them and so on. So Martha Root was there. Immediately she goes and starts booking, you know, ships and packing bags and so on. And one of the first places she wants to go is somewhere that's mentioned in the tablets of the Divine Plan. And lo and behold, in this textbook, the city Bahia is there in big bold letters. So Abdul Baha would have seen that map, you know, here's this word with Bahia. And he mentioned it, as you know, twice in Tablets of the Divine Plan. So that was one of the places Martha Root wanted to go. It's one of the reasons she first went to Brazil. And on the trip, as she comes into the north of Brazil, there's many, many, many amazing stories, but I just want to share one. She arrives in Brazil, and she hears a man chanting Arabic. And she's like, this is weird. I'm in Brazil. This guy's chanting Arabic. Let me go introduce myself, see what this is all about. So she goes and she says, hi, I'm Martha Root. You know, I'm a Baha'i. And it turns out the gentleman says, oh yeah, I know Abu Baha really well. I live in Palestine. And by the way, my father knew Baha'u'llah really well, you know, so what's this guy doing in Brazil? And she happens to encounter him. So there's all these confirmations and amazing things happen in her travels. Another place you might remember from Tablets of the Divine Plan is Panama. And again, in the textbook, there's a little description of Panama and how strategic it is. And you remember Abdul Baha gave special importance to Panama. We have a beautiful house of worship in Panama right now. And so Martha Root, in order to get from the east coast of Brazil all the way to Panama, she had to go across the South American continent. So she actually went on the back of a mule through the Andes Mountains. And I did a quick Google, if we can just go back just a second. I did a quick Google search of mules in Andes Mountains, and that's what came up. So it gives you a sense of what her journey would have seemed like or looked like. So if you go to the next slide, this is again from the textbook. It mentions the Woolworth building, which at that time was the tallest building in the world. And it says, hey, one of the people who described traveling across the Andes said, if you would consider riding around the edge of the Woolworth building, covered in ice and snow, on a gentle mule, a safe pastime, then have no fears about crossing the Andes in winter. So here's Martha Root having no fears, and she describes her experience as she was crossing the Andes. She was praying on these beautiful high mountains, saying to pray the greatest name along these minarets of God was to glimpse the glory of the eternal, the unknowable. And I wanted to tell this story because she was the first Baha'i to enter the country of Chile. And she, you know, was on the, I think, the radio or the newspaper in Chile. But look at what's going to be dedicated just in 2 months' time. And look how far, you know, this has come in just 100 years. So she laid the first seeds. Now, a couple more stories. What do Montreal and Queen Marie have in common? And in the name, but that's one thing. So in Tablets of the Divine Plan, Abdul Baha talks about Montreal. And it's kind of funny, he says, before my departure, many souls warned me not to travel to Montreal, saying the majority of the inhabitants are Catholics, and they're in the utmost fanaticism. Like, why is someone trying to stop Abdul Baha from going places? I don't know, but that's what he said. But he says, these stories did not have any effect on the resolution of Abdul Baha. He, trusting in God, turned his face towards Montreal. When he entered that city, he observed all the doors open. And then here's some of the many, you know, pieces of press coverage of Abdul Baha's trip to Montreal. And he says, therefore I hope that in the future Montreal may become so stirred that the melody of the kingdom may travel to all parts of the world from that dominion, and the breaths of the Holy Spirit may spread from that center to the east and the west of America. Imagine people tried to stop him from going, and here's what happened. So the point being that he followed Baha'u'llah's injunction to be as unrestrained as the wind. The wind just goes wherever and shares the message, right? So if we go to the next, so Martha Root did the same thing. What you see on the left is the palace in Romania where she first met Queen Marie. And what's interesting is, she was in Romania, you know, 1 or 2 weeks, not that long. And she first tried, I think, with the US State Department and said, hey, I'd like to meet the Queen. And they said, you're kidding, just, no, go away, right? And then she also tried with some of the people who arranged schedules at the palace itself. And they said, you know, not only is it inappropriate for you to even ask, but the Queen is mourning right now. She's had a very hard time, and she's not seeing anybody, let alone you, okay? So in any case, Martha Root sent a package of material through, said, can you just give this to the Queen? So she goes home, next day, gets a message that says the Queen would like to see you. Goes to meet the Queen, and the Queen says, you know, I've been up since 3 till 3:30 in the morning reading what you just sent me. It came at exactly the right point in my life. You know, it really hit my heart, and that was the first interview that she had. Oh, just one more thing on that. So again, she was unrestrained as the wind. She just kept trying. And on the right, you see the castle. It's way up in the mountains in Romania, where she had, I think, her second interview with the Queen. And by this time, she had been in correspondence, and it became clear that Queen Marie had accepted the faith. So she said, basically, I believe in this. And so the Queen sent a limousine to go and pick her up and drive her up this windy mountain to go to the castle. And about a couple of miles out, Martha Root said, do you mind if I walk the rest of the way? And the limo driver was like, okay, it's a little weird, but go ahead, So she walks up this windy road to the castle. And she says the reason that she did that was she was conscious that she was making a pilgrimage to visit the first reigning monarch, or the first monarch who had accepted Baha'u'llah's revelation. And she knew that this interview would go down in history. And she said, the least I can do is, as a pilgrim, walk. So look at this consciousness that she had of history. She met many, many leaders. I want to tell one quick story about Thomas Masaryk of Czechoslovakia.
Montreal?
No,
What was the connection between?
Oh, so the connection was how people tried to stop them, the doors were all shut, and they kept at it, and then look at the amazing results that came. Sorry, I should have tied it all together. So this gentleman, he was called the George Washington of Czechoslovakia. He was, when it first became a republic, I think in 1920, something like that. So again, Martha Root, was first told, no, you can't meet him. Somehow she got through, she meets him. And he's sympathetic to the faith. So as time goes by, she arranges with him to translate Baha'u'llah and the New Era into Czech. And one of his friends or colleagues was kind of like the William Shakespeare of Czechoslovakia. So they got this guy, this famous literary person, to translate Baha'u'llah and the New Era into Czech. And then this president agrees to write the foreword to Baha'u'llah and the New Era. So think of the reaction in the country. You've got this most famous literary person translating it. You've got the president giving the introduction. And all because of the efforts of this lady who was, many people said, she didn't even know how to dress, she was so plain, and things like that. So again, the pop culture reference. What do Bruce Springsteen, Martha Root, and Bono have in common? Well, go to the next slide. These are examples of some of the audiences, just single talks given by Martha Root. So in Sydney, Australia, she hops up on the back of a truck and she speaks to 1,000 people with no microphone, just yelling out about the glad tidings, and they're all listening. In Auckland, New Zealand, 2,000 people. I think it was in an opera house. In Srinagar, Kashmir, which is this amazing place in the Himalayan mountains. Everyone stick it on your bucket list because it's a great place to go. I've been there many years ago. She spoke to 4,000 people in one audience. China, 2,000 people. Tokyo, 2,000 people. Right? So talk about superhero and confirmations. So I wanted to share a couple more stories. In the textbook, I found this place called Chagos Archipelago. It's right there in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And I want to share a story about this place. If you do a Google search, this is what you find of Chagos Archipelago. It's literally this thing that there's nothing around it, just ocean and sharks. The shark came up in the Google search, by the way. So I happen to know the Knight of Baha'u'llah who went to this place. His name is Puva Murde. And this is a photo of him when he was 17 years old. And so this place was kind of like an indentured servant colony. You had to, almost like a slave, you have to become one of those to even make it to this place. And only Mauritians could go as indentured servants. So Puva, he says he knew the remover of difficulties and a laupa, and Bill Sears gave him a piece of the coagulated blood of Baha'u'llah to take with him as protection. Because what happened on this island was this boss who ran the island was very, very vicious. Like he would whip people off and sometimes he would feed people to the sharks that were on the island. So when Shoghi Effendi heard that Puva had arisen to go to this place, Shoghi Effendi had tears in his eyes. And he said, he is my hero, speaking of the hero's journey. And I was thinking a lot about one verse that's in the Tablets of the Divine Plan. It says, the dweller conferreth honor upon the dwelling. So even this place in the middle of the ocean with nothing but sharks has got this amazing spiritual potency and spiritual forces associated with it by the action of the Baha'i who went there. And if we go to the next slide, about a month and a half ago I went on a trip to Anchorage, Alaska for work. And as I was flying out, by the way, if you ever go to Anchorage, get the window seat. Do whatever you have to do to get the window seat, because it's incredible. So I took this photo, just a little after taking off, and then as we go over these mountains, you come to this place called the Aleutian Islands. And I thought, hey, I had dinner with the Knight of Baha'u'llah for the Aleutian Islands, Janabi Caldwell. And it was a lovely, lovely time I spent with him. And again, this thought came to me of the dweller conferreth honor upon the dwelling. Here's this place in the middle of just ocean and polar bears, and it's got this amazing power to it because of the actions of the Knight of Baha'u'llah. And as I was talking to the junior youth, I was using the analogy of Pokemon, the new game that everyone's going crazy about. So the thing about Pokemon is, you're on this physical plane, but if you've got the right app, you start to see these creatures that show up, right? Why is it that Pokemon is so successful? It might be because it's tapping into this spiritual need that people have, or are subconsciously aware of, that there are other beings in other dimensions, even as we're in this physical world. And that helps you understand the concourse on high and all these things we're talking about here. So the junior youth were like, oh, this is amazing, I get it. So we also wanted to show how the tablets of the Divine Plan, they weren't just for 1916, they're not just for 2016. They actually go thousands of years in the past and many thousands of years into the future. So if we go into the past for a second, the tablets of the Divine Plan are referred to in the book of Daniel, which was approximately 167 BC when it was written. He's the guy who got stuck with the lions and somehow came out of it. Okay. So there was discussion about this prophecy that in chapter 12 of Daniel, verse 11 and 12, basically 1335 days, in the Bible, day tends to be year, right? So 1335 days comes to 1335 solar years from when Muhammad went to Medina to 1963 is the year. If you have more questions, ask Lame later, because he's going to help with the prophecy stuff, right? Because it's more complicated than quantum physics, I think. So anyway, if we go to the next slide. In 1954, as most of the Baha'is had gone out and were winning the goals of the 10-year crusade, there was a discussion at the table where Shoghi Effendi was talking about this prophecy of Daniel. And he said how most of the goals that were, have been set were being won, even in 1954. And Shoghi Effendi, with a twinkle in his eye, said, Daniel had no idea what kind of a prophet Baha'u'llah would be. Miscalculated by 9 years, right? And then Leroy Ios, who was also at the table, handed the cause. He said, Shoghi Effendi, if I can say something, Daniel had no idea what kind of a guardian we would have. So that was to show how it goes back in time. And then as we go forward in time, let's focus up to 2044. Shoghi Effendi actually wrote about the period of the second Baha'i century. And the House of Justice alluded to this in the message for this 5-year plan. So Shoghi Effendi says the second century is destined to witness a tremendous deployment and a notable consolidation of the forces working towards the worldwide development of that order, so that's the administrative order, as well as the first stirrings of that world order, of which the present administrative system is at once the precursor, the nucleus, and pattern. So isn't that fascinating that not just the administrative order, but the first stirrings of the world order are going to be visible by 2044. Hopefully we're all around then and we can see what that means. But it's a whole discussion in and of itself.
Where does he write that?
I think if you go to the next page, here it is, June 15, 1946. Yeah, we can go to the next. Sorry, I'm skipping a few of the quotes because we ran out of a bit of time in the beginning with the setup. So yeah, please look up June 15, 1946. It's in Citadel of Faith. It's an amazing, amazing letter. And there's things we won't have time to cover today, but you'll find so much from this letter. I was going to say that to help read the tablets of the Divine Plan, it also helps to read Advent of Divine Justice because it amplifies so much of the tablets of the Divine Plan. And then 10 years later, Shoghi Effendi wrote this letter, and he basically talks about how this is the letter where he talks about the major and the minor plans, and how the minor plan began with the tablets of the Divine Plan, and the major plan, Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, and there's a whole beautiful discussion in that letter. So now, going more than 2044, let's go to the Golden Age, shall we? Anyone know when the Golden Age will start? I don't. So Shoghi Effendi in Citadel of Faith, page 113, he says, tablets of the Divine Plan destined to reveal the full measure of its potentialities, not only through the successive epochs of the formative age of the faith, but in the course of the vast reaches of time, stretching into the golden, the last age of the Baha'i dispensation. And Mr. Naqshbandi, in the book Shoghi Effendi, author of Teaching Plans, he makes this interesting statement. He says, Shoghi Effendi pointed out that the golden age of our faith will have its own epochs and crusades. He also indicated that the tablets of Abdul Baha's Divine Plan had relevance to the developments of the golden age of the faith. Thus, crusades during the golden age will fall under the shadow of the contents of the Divine Plan. Amazing. So I'd like to share a little anecdote. It's been about 10 years ago. I was serving in Haifa and had the incredible privilege of being able to meet Mr. Semple during his last year and so on in serving on the House of Justice. And Mr. Semple told this story about when he was on pilgrimage, April 1957. And he asked Shoghi Effendi a very specific question about a very specific passage in God Passes By. So I just love this story. On page 324 of God Passes By, Shoghi Effendi says, "The last, the golden age, destined to witness the emergence of a world-embracing order, enshrining the ultimate fruit of God's latest revelation to mankind, a fruit whose maturity must signalize the establishment of a world civilization and the formal inauguration of the kingdom of the Father upon earth, as promised by Jesus Christ himself." So in the earlier session, Lame was talking about how all religions are waiting for this promised kingdom on earth. And so Mr. Semple asked Shoghi Effendi, what does this mean? What does this formal inauguration of the kingdom of God on earth mean? And Shoghi Effendi said it means exactly what it says. There's going to come a time in the future when the Universal House of Justice will formally inaugurate the kingdom of God on earth. So there'll be this announcement to the entire world that the kingdom of God on earth has begun. So fascinating. Right? So this is going forward in time on this earth. Now let's talk about other worlds. This is, again, the whole point is to inspire you to read Tablets of the Divine Plan, because not only is it going to help all these generations here, but it'll help our souls through all the worlds of God. So in Memorials of the Faithful, Abdul Baha describes a dream that he had where he kind of speaks to one of the hands of the cause who had recently passed away and gone to the next world. And he says, "One night, not long ago, I saw him, Mullah Ali Akbar, in the world of dreams. I said to him, 'Junab, you've grown good and stout.' 'Yes,' he answered, 'praise be to God. I've been in places where the air was fresh and sweet, and the water crystal pure. The landscapes were beautiful to look upon, the foods delectable.'" Sounds like a good time in the next world, right? It all agreed with me, of course, so I'm stronger than ever now, and I've recovered the zest of my early youth. The breaths of the All-Merciful blew over me, and all my time was spent in telling of God. I have been setting forth his proofs and teaching his faith." And then Abdul Baha says, "The meaning of teaching the faith in the next world is spreading the sweet savors of holiness. That action is the same as teaching." So this act of teaching will continue. And then if we go to, that's Mullah Ali Akbar. So we all remember in the long obligatory prayers, we're saying it, there's a verse that Baha'u'llah instructs us to say, "Make my prayer, O my Lord, a fountain of living waters, whereby I may live as long as thy sovereignty endureth, and may make mention of thee in every world of thy worlds." So again, this action of making mention of God and teaching this faith applies in every world of God's worlds. How are we doing on time? Okay. We got time? Okay, good. So a couple more things. In some letters, Shoghi Effendi actually talks about what happens in the Akbar kingdom when certain distinguished souls enter the Akbar kingdom. And these tend to be letters that are written in Persian. So in the telegram that was written when Martha Root passed away, and again, this is just to show how teaching is significant in the next world as well as this world, and how we all want to get a copy of Tablets of the Divine Plan and study it because it's going to be with us forever. So Shoghi Effendi says, "The pure leaf and renowned teacher, Martha Root, has ascended to the highest summits of paradise. The people of the Supreme Concourse came forth to meet her with the shout, 'Welcome to thee, O pride of men and women teachers. Well done, well done. Thou hast spent thy whole being in devotion to the kingdom of the Lord of signs and utterances. Blessed, 1,000-fold blessed art thou, within this shining, proud, lofty station.'" And Shoghi Effendi also wrote about what happened in the Akbar kingdom when May Maxwell ascended. He said, "That severed teacher, brand from the fire of the love of God, and spreader of the fragrances of God, Mrs. Maxwell, forsook her native land and hastened to the most distant countries out of love for her master and yearning to sound the call to the cause of her Lord and her inspiration, until she ascended to the highest summit, attaining the rank of martyrdom in the capital of Argentina, the furthermost boundary. The countenances of paradise invoke blessings upon her in the glorious apex, saying, may she enjoy with healthy relish the cup that is full and brimming over with the wine of the love of God. Beautiful, right? So we want to tie this all together now to you and me and everyone in this room, and all the junior youth and youth we want to try and inspire. So a quick bit of perspective on your life. If you do a quick Google search, you'll notice the theme, right? I'm doing a lot of Google searching here. That the number of souls who is estimated to have ever lived, so since recorded history began, so we can say about the Adamic cycle, is about 100 billion. So about 100 billion people have passed through this earth. And if we project forward, we know the Baha'i cycle will be at least 500,000 years. So just talking about this earth for a second, because we know that there's 10,000 billion habitable planets in the universe, and those creatures have souls too, and that's a whole other discussion. But just focusing on Earth, I did some quick calculations. There's going to be about 1.5 quadrillion souls who will pass through this Earth during the Baha'i cycle. Now what's interesting is that there's a tablet of Abdu'l-Baha that he wrote when he was a teenager, the Tablet of the Hidden Treasure, where Abdu'l-Baha says that just like your fingerprints, I mean, this is paraphrasing obviously, but the idea is just like your fingerprints and your DNA is unique, everyone's configuration of the names and attributes of God is unique for that individual. And he actually says that's the reason why there's often disagreements, because one guy's so focused on justice and the other one's focused on mercy and all that stuff. But what's interesting is that all of us have a unique configuration of these names and attributes of God. And if we aren't able to contribute to the world and human history, our configuration, then the whole world and all of human history is deprived of that. No one else can make up that exact unique thing, right? Yeah, and then you also think about how early we are in this 1.5 quadrillion souls who are going to come through. You know, many of us in this room, you know in LinkedIn it says how many degrees of separation you are from somebody. So many of us in this room might be third-degree connections from Tahiri, from one of the letters of the living. So the way that I am is I know someone who knew Abdu'l-Baha as a child, and Abdu'l-Baha sat on the lap of Tahiri as a child. So on LinkedIn, I'd be a third-degree connection to Tahiri. So that shows how close we are to this amazing part. So I want to tell one more story, and then I'll hand it over to Sharaf. Okay, so this is an account that I read online recently about the last hours of Mr. Furtan's life. As many of you know, Mr. Furtan would, all of us who have been on pilgrimage, just incredibly blessed to have had him spend time with us in the Pilgrim House. And so he wasn't feeling well, but on the day of the covenant, many people expected him not to come, but he made a special effort to come. And there had been a lot of Russian pilgrims in that group, my understanding is. And so he came, and he said, you know, Shoghi, he said, it's my duty to come and be with the pilgrims. And that night he gave a talk, and he quoted from Baha'u'llah where he says, teaching is a duty. It's in Gleanings, right? And Mr. Furtan told a story about this Russian Tsar who was kind of inspecting the troops. And he saw this guard with red nose and stuff coming out his eyes and out his ears. I don't know what was going on. The guy was really, really sick. And the Tsar went up to him and he said, what are you doing here? You should be in bed, you know? And the soldier said, but it's my duty to be here. I will not desert my post of duty. And the Tsar said, okay, go home. I'm going to stand here until I can arrange someone else to come. So then finally the guy said, okay, I fulfilled my duty, right? So Mr. Furtan was talking about our individual duty, teaching, and his duty to be with the pilgrims, and then literally after that talk and after spending some time with the Russian pilgrims, he collapsed and went to the Appa kingdom. So, and that beautiful photo here with Dizzy Gillespie, wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall there, or fly on the... Yeah. So I'll turn it over to Sharaf here.
We can't cover all the materials, so we're probably going to have to cut it a little bit.
We cannot see it.
Cannot see? Sure. Can you see it? All right, so the tablets of the divine plan. The biggest factor that as we read the tablets, is not the idea that it's a worldwide push, or a worldwide administrative push, or a planned, organized push. It's basically all comes down to the individual believer. And this sums up pretty much what the Guardian has kind of given us the task to understand what our obligations are when we read the writings, especially the tablets of the divine plan. So I'm going to read it out so you can hear it. It says, this challenge, so severe and insistent and yet so glorious, faces no doubt primarily the individual believer on whom, in the last resort, depends the fate of the entire community. He it is who constitutes the warp and woof on which the quality and pattern of the whole fabric must depend. He it is who acts as one of the countless links in the mighty chain that now girdles the globe. He, again, the individual, is who serves as one of the multitude of bricks which supports the structure and ensures the stability of the administrative edifice now being raised in every part of the world. Without his support, this is the individual believer, at once wholehearted, continuous and generous, every measure adopted, every plan formulated by the body which acts as the national representative of the community to which he belongs is foredoomed to failure. The world center of the faith itself is paralyzed if such a support on the part of the rank and file of the community is denied it. The author of the divine plan himself is impeded in his purpose if the proper instruments of the execution of his design are lacking. That's in reference to Abdu'l-Baha himself. The sustaining strength of Baha'u'llah himself, the founder of the faith, will be withheld from every and each individual who fails in the long run to raise and play his part. Arise and play his part. Yeah, the reference is Citadel of Faith. It was our fault. We recognize this later. But Citadel of Faith, you'll find it, the actual page. We'll have to give it to you after we're done. But it's Citadel of Faith. I think in the current times that we live in, especially within the Baha'i community, we have to understand this as part of the understanding of how we proceed and project our own understanding with the faith. Now, the reason why we're bringing this up is as we study the writings and as we study the tablets of the divine plan, which are, as we said, are the charter for the future world civilization, it does not matter if and when, if a local spiritual assembly or a national spiritual assembly or even the World Center come out with a plan, without the individual believer as part of full-hearted in support and in encouraging that plan, the plan itself fails. So, there was a institutional member that asked me a question a few years back. He had asked, well, isn't the community itself the instigator to inspire the friends to move forward? Without those plans of the institutions, part of the divine plan, part of the 5-year plan, the 7-year plan, as we proceed, aren't those what inspire the individual believer to move forward? It is not correct. Within the writings itself, it's very clear that the individual believer is the bulwark of the forces of the faith itself. The creative word itself through these tablets is the only way that the individual believer can help sustain the current plan. Now, we're in the 5-year plan currently, and as we just read the plan itself, we cannot just stop there. A lot of us kind of go into our deepening sessions and we just stop with the World Center letter for the Rizwan. And we say, okay, this is the plan forward. But what has to happen, we have to juggle two things at once. You must revert back to the plans of the divine tablets. You must revert back to the tablets so you can understand in full measure what the House of Justice is saying and the plans that are supported by the National Assembly and Local Assembly. If that exercise is lacking, we do a disservice to the reasoning why the House of Justice puts out these letters. And I think the discipline that it encounters all of us is that to understand that the basic writings and the core writings, which is the revealed writings, is what sustains us and gives us purpose through that plan. I found that in current years, we're a little bit lacking in the sense of trying to create that discipline to educate ourselves and to immerse ourselves in the current writings that we have among us, and then understand the letters of the House of Justice. In the tablets of the Divine Plan, there is an interesting, as you will read this, it is basically a call for teaching. Now, the faith is very simple as we read it, and you might find it the same way. The core element to the tablets of the Divine Plan is to teach the faith. And Abdu'l-Baha gives 3 prerequisites to achieving that goal. And he calls it to become an apostle of Baha'u'llah, which is, you would think, where it's unattainable. But the pure at heart, when they understand these 3 conditions, can understand what that means for himself, which inspires the current plan of the House of Justice, which inspires the current plan of the National Assembly. Those are the 3 that Abdu'l-Baha stresses in detail as you read these. One is firmness in the covenant, and in that he gives details in the tablets of the Divine Plan what that means. Second, fellowship and love among the believers. Now one might think, well, it's just chai, tea, polo, sabzi polo. It's not that. It's basically the understanding through that tablet is the idea of what racial prejudice is about, how we interact with one another, how we love one another under all conditions, that we understand those particular prerequisites when we engage with each other, which is a lifelong difficulty and challenge, but it's made that part of that condition. Third condition and last is we must teach and travel. So one might think, okay, well, that day's over. Now we're in a whole different era where we need to just, stay in our communities and we'll do the institute process and we'll kind of just, hunker down. But you have to remember that this is part and parcel, part of the bigger process. That we should not neglect the personal obligations we have in teaching. It doesn't mean that we have to be organized and go out and gather a group and do some door knocking on the doors and do whatever. We have to do that on a personal level, meaning that as we go out, we're always engaging with the people who are not aware of the cause in some fashion or form. And that we emulate that. Doesn't mean we need to confirm them in the faith, but at least they hear the message of Baha'u'llah. The last 2 things, and then we'll take questions. Abdu'l-Baha, in the Tablets of the Divine Plan, the primary word he uses is guidance. And I'm not sure what the word guidance means in Farsi, but I'm sure it has a bigger meaning. But that word guidance in the Tablets of the Divine Plan is the bulwark of how he perceives how we're to proceed forward within the context of the whole tablet. Guidance, guidance, guidance. And he projects that with the Quranic verses, and also he projects that with the biblical verses that we have in the Tablets of the Divine Plan. Each verse basically reverts back to the idea of guiding humanity, guiding the people, guiding. Interestingly, as Lamia was also expressing that it's a culture, within the Tablets of the Divine Plan, Abdu'l-Baha has referenced biblical references about 12 times. Quranic references about 10 times. And it's interesting that those references constitute this divine culture that Lamia was speaking about. This divine culture which institutes itself way back into the early years of when the revealed word was given to humanity, that we teach the faith. This is the predominant guidance that we have, is to teach the faith. This is the divine culture that proceeds down from Moses, Abraham, all the way down to Muhammad and in the current age. Without it, there is no purpose. No matter what institutional schemes we have, or no matter how many ways we put it down, or how many ways we confuse it or make it more complicated, it doesn't constitute the specific task of just teaching the faith. Okay? The last thing I'll say, and it just basically goes to the idea of how we perceive teaching the faith. There's so many ideas out there, and we always revert back to the writing and say, well, how does that work? So many different ways to perceive it. My recommendation, after reading to some extent, is that we have an abundance of writings and accounts of the life of Abdu'l-Baha. There's 3 books that have been translated. There's a vast number of books that haven't been translated, but the 3 I would recommend so that you can study the pattern of teaching is A Promulgation of Universal Peace, Talks in London, and Paris Talks. These 3, which we have translated. And the reason why I reference it is that though they're considered pilgrim notes, though they're considered kind of not authoritative, it gives you an idea of the pattern of Abdu'l-Baha's engagement in the teaching process, which, as we know, Abdu'l-Baha is the perfect human being. He is a perfect exemplar of how this process works. So as you read the context of this vast amount of recollection of Abdu'l-Baha, how he engaged with clerical people, the poor, people of different races, people of high and low position, you can see how he engages humanity at different levels. That, in my estimation, is the pulse we have to put on so that we can understand what that process is. It's no reason for us to reinvent. We can add to it, but when we have that immeasurable example of the master who gave his life at the end of his life to travel to these regions, there was a reason for it. And one of these reasons was for us to take note and for us to take that example and to understand what that engagement was. And you'll see, even though multitudes of people did not become Baha'is, the ultimate goal, as we see with Martha Root, with Agnes Alexander, was the seeds being planted because of that power. Abdu'l-Baha came, the whole world didn't become Baha'i, or the North American continent become Baha'i. Why? But he did sow the seeds. And that is how we as Baha'is engage the rest of the community, knowing that those seeds will eventually have a purpose, right? And it's more specific for the youth and the junior youth as they understand this. It's not just a system, but it's a heartfelt process. And we need to convey that to the younger generation as best as we can. The creative word is where we can start, and through Ruhi and through the Institute process that enhances those tools as well. But you have to do both. Context is important. You must read the writings. You got to read it as well. 2 other books, so remember, all the promulgation, Paris talks, London talks, and then also I would recommend to also engage yourself in the Advent of Divine Justice. Lame also had expressed how important that book is. This is a charter book that accompanies the Tablets of Divine Plan that give the youth and the junior youth a specific process in teaching and morals and how they engage with other people.
Thank you, Sharaf.